Assalamu alaikum. My name is Umar and I represent Indian American Muslim Council, an advocacy organization established in the aftermath of 2002 with regard to India to voice the concerns and plights of Indian Muslims, other minorities and marginalized communities in India. Today we are going to look at a lecture titled Kashmir 1947, the legacy of how the Kashmir issue came to be, and the Fouad Khatib is going to be talking about it based on a book by Alastaire Lamb. To introduce Brother Fouad, he's been a leader in the local community and has been the past president of CARE as well, and he is the current president of Muslim Community Association in the South Bay. A couple of words about Indian American Muslim Council. Like I mentioned, it was established in the aftermath of 2002, and by 2040 it is said that Indian Muslims are going to be the largest block of Muslims in any country, and little is known about them abroad especially, and I have heard people ask me that are there Muslims in India? So you would be surprised to hear the level of awareness in the larger American Muslim community or any diaspora abroad. We intend to bring about a series of educational events on topics related to Indian Muslims, and Brother Fouad has graciously agreed to talk about several of those topics in the coming months, inshallah. So today we will look at Kashmir 1947 and the events and the history leading up to the Kashmir dispute as we know today. Jazakallah.
Can you hear me well? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum. So we are here tonight talking about a different kind of subject than we have been talking about before, prior to this in our education series. Tonight's talk is based on a scholarly work called Kashmir, a Disputed Legacy by a British writer, scholar named Alastaire Lamb. This book was published by Oxford University Press. So all what you hear tonight is based on Alastaire Lamb's book. And as always, as I mentioned in the beginning of my lecture, I read and I come and give presentations with no pretensions of scholarship on my part. So this is what I've read and I'm presenting to you, inshallah. All of what you hear will not include any of my analysis or my views. That we're not going to talk about the solution to Kashmir problems, etc. We're going to try to understand the events of 1947 that formed the foundation or basis of the Kashmir dispute. Although the book covers a lot more, but we are going to be restricting ourselves to 1947. So the contextual background, first some contextual background. The President General position as understood is that the Pakistan side feels or thinks that the Kashmir issue is to be solved by a reference to the people, meaning by means of a referendum, or as it is also known as plebiscite. And the Indian side feels that there has been a political process inside the state of Kashmir, as India sees the Kashmir region controlled by India as, and that political process is an adequate substitute for referendum. So these are the general prevailing positions, without refining it further. Let me first get into the state of British Raj or British rule in India in 1947. So at the time of independence, there were roughly about 560 princely states in India. Princely states mean little kingdoms, etc. Out of these princely states occupied roughly 1/3 of the British territory, British India territory, and other 2/3 was British territory. Now, out of these 560, about 140 states were quote unquote fully empowered state. What does that mean? It means those states were empowered to have their own constitutional and legislative powers, meaning they could make their own laws, and the British law did not apply in the territories of those 140 states, right? But other states had greater measure of British control. There were different levels of control, but there was no doubt about who was in charge. All states subscribed to or accepted what is known as British paramountcy, which is a nice word in Queen's English for supremacy or ultimate authority, right? Now, with the lapse of, some of these states, princely states, even some of the 140 fully empowered states were big. For example, Kashmir and Hyderabad were two very large states, right? But many of these states, or at least some of the states, were very small, some occupying no more than just a mere few hundred acres of land, right? You can think of them as fiefs rather than states. So with the lapse of paramountcy, which is with independence of the British rule, independence from the British rule in India, the fully empowered states were to become independent states on their own. And they had a choice to join whatever dominion followed the British Raj, or they could choose to remain independent as separate states, right? The cabinet mission, the British cabinet mission that came to India in 1946, and will not divert to that, but if you ask in Q&A, we can talk a little bit about cabinet mission. It came to India in 1946 to do the groundwork or lay the ground rules for orderly transition of power from British rule to whatever dominions follow, right? But in 1947, by the beginning of 1947, it was very clear that two dominions are going to emerge. So these states, fully empowered states, could choose to join either of the two dominions, which is either the Union of India or the Dominion of Pakistan, or they could choose to remain independent, right? The cabinet mission said nothing about the requirement or need for the rulers of these princely states to consult their people before making the decision to go one way or another, right? And these states could make their decisions irrespective of geographical considerations. For example, if there is a state which is adjacent to what became the Pakistan side, Muslim majority states, and yet the ruler of the state wanted to accede to India, they could accede to India. So geographical considerations would not override their right to determine where they wanted to go, the prince's right. And now it was possible for any state that was contemplating accession or thinking about whether to accede or not to enter into what was then called as the standstill agreement. As the term implies, standstill agreement means that you want to keep things the way they are while you ponder what to do about accession. The purpose of the standstill agreement was to maintain the relations and the conventions of transportation, communication, etc. So the human life is not disturbed while the state government is pondering over what to do about accession. Right? And under these rules of accession, all states got absorbed one way or another in 1947, except three. One was Kashmir, the second was Hyderabad, and I don't know, can somebody name the third one? It was what is known as the Mysore state. There were three large states, Mysore state, right? Now, of these, Kashmir and Hyderabad were very large states. They were themselves comparable in size to United Kingdom, roughly 80,000 square miles or plus territory. And out of these three states, only Mysore state joined the Union of India without conflict. In the case of Kashmir, there's a conflict, and in Hyderabad there was a conflict before it joined the Union of India. So under the accession rules, Maharaja Hari Singh of Kashmir, who was the ruler, he was a Hindu ruler, Maharaja Hari Singh, he could choose to go to either dominion, despite the fact that his dominion included 75% of population that was Muslim. Okay. So let's get some geographical background. We saw the contextual background, but geographical background, and you can refer to this map over here. The British interest in Kashmir, and in particular the northern territories, which were of tremendous interest to Britain, were in part due to their proximity to Russia. And an intriguing point, and this we'll cover perhaps in the next month's topic, what the relationship is, but I'm going to skip that now. Kashmir bordered Tibet on the east side, which is now on the Chinese side. Xinjiang, which is the large territory in western China, formerly known as Eastern Turkestan. And it was narrowly separated by Soviet Union, and today it's narrowly separated by Tajikistan. And if you see here, this area that comes here between the Kashmir territory and Tajikistan is that extension of Afghanistan known as the Wakhan Valley. Wakhan, it sits at the base of, or close to the Pamir range of mountains, beautiful mountains that extend into Tajikistan. The northern frontier of Kashmir runs along, you can see it's mountainous, along what is known as the Karakoram mountain range. And this range actually marks the watershed. Watershed means the point from where water flows this way or that way. The watershed between what is known as the Tarim Basin and the Indus River system. Tarim Basin refers to the vast expanse of land which we call Xinjiang, or part of Xinjiang, or Eastern Turkestan, which is on the Chinese side generally now. And the Indus River system is on this side. Okay. So Pakistan and China, they embarked on settling their boundary demarcations, and they settled their boundary demarcations based on the watershed of Karakoram range, meaning if the melting snow, the water from melting snow flows towards Tarim Basin, then that area where that water flows, that's Chinese territory. And if the water flows through the Indus River water system, that was Pakistani territory. And this matter was settled in 1963. And I believe... Sorry? So you have, this is you can say the Karakoram region, right? And the boundary is here. You see here, this area was ceded by Pakistan to Kashmir. So some area was given, some area was taken. The net impact was that I think the net gain was like Pakistan gained 20 square miles of territory or something like that. And we'll come to the different regions within this Kashmir area. So, and this was settled, I believe, entirely at the bureaucratic level. That means the technical people from Geological Survey of both countries, they settled the matter without involvement of the leadership, political leadership, to do a handshake and solve the problem. In contrast, there still remains a boundary dispute between China and India, and it's a significant boundary dispute, about 1,500 miles long boundary, not necessarily contiguous, but both in the northeast region of India as well as neighboring to Kashmir. Total of 1,500 miles remain in dispute today. Actually, the author, Alastaire Lamb, is also the author of a book on the Chinese-Indian boundary dispute. I myself have not read that book, but inshallah someday we'll try to read it. On the western side and the northern side, the state touched the Pamir Mountains here. As I said, it extends into Tajikistan. And on Afghanistan side here, it is very close to, or it touches, you can say, the Hindu Kush Mountains. Right? So Karakoram Range, Hindu Kush Mountains, the Pamir Mountains, and to the east lies the high plateau of Tibet, many thousand feet above sea level, to the south of which has the great Himalayan range, in which lies the tallest peak in the world, known as Mount Everest. The second tallest peak, K2, lies in, you know what it says, northern areas. Let me go there. It's the same map, basically, but it shows different areas. So you have this area, Baltistan, or Gilgit Agency, as you see that. In that area, the second tallest peak, known as K2, which is the letter K and the digit 2, lies in this area. And it is, it's an area where there are several peaks which are higher than 25,000 feet. And that's a key strategic factor, because the melting snow, or these peaks pack a lot of snow. And three important rivers of Kashmir, they either originate in Kashmir or they traverse through Kashmir, which is the Jhelum, Chenab, and the Indus River. And Pakistan relies on water supply from these rivers for its prosperity and well-being. Now, there were two old routes to the northern frontier. By 1848, these routes became known to the British, who were exploring, right? And remember, 1848 is before 1857, when the British Crown actually took hold of India officially, right? When we say that they discovered the routes or became aware of the routes prior to that, we're talking about the British East India Company, for those who are aware of it. Whoever controlled the northern territories could collect dues on trade that is occurring between China and Central Asia, or between India and Central Asia. That's why the territory was very, very important and very strategic. So the eastern route was known as the Ladakh route, which after independence was inherited by India. And the western route was inherited, known as the Gilgit route or route. We are on the west coast route, east coast, and Queen's English's route. And that was inherited by Pakistan. And this Gilgit route actually evolved into what came to be known as the Great Karakoram Highway. People who are familiar, it's a highway between China and Pakistan. The western parts of Xinjiang, or the Chinese Turkestan, as we said, was formerly known as Eastern Turkestan, is largely Muslim. Actually, it is Muslim, right? The Chinese dominion over this area had been by and large maintained by the prestige of the Chinese imperial dynasty and not by overt force. Right? Now, this area also includes a place or a valley called Hunza. Those who are familiar, it's a very famous valley on which I think the movie Shangri-La was based, and then the legend of Shangri-La is based. There was a dispute between the Amir of Hunza and Chinese authorities. But I'm going to skip that. If you remind me, we can cover that in the Q&A. It's just an interesting anecdote. Now, access to Gilgit was very, very difficult. To access Gilgit, the British needed cooperation of the Kashmir government. First, the terrain was very difficult. And of course, all the terrain there was controlled by the Kashmir government, right? Later on, in about 1890s, it became possible to access Gilgit via Rawalpindi and Sialkot, which are presently in Pakistan. So British had maintained some scouts in Gilgit, known as Gilgit Scouts. So after 1890s, they were able to strengthen their scout garrison, but yet they needed the cooperation of Kashmir government in order to access and maintain that garrison. In 1935, the British Indian government leased this area called the Gilgit Agency, and you can see Gilgit Agency written there, it's in green. Gilgit Agency was leased for 60 years, but in 1947, the paramountcy lapsed. India and Pakistan became independent. At that time, the last viceroy in India, Louis Mountbatten, decided that with the lapse of paramountcy, the control of the Gilgit Agency will return to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Right? In 1899, a British surveyor, I know there are a lot of details, but please pay attention. I'm going to try to go as slow and speak as concisely as possible. In 1899, a British surveyor named W.H. Johnson was hired by the state of Jammu and Kashmir to do a trigonometric survey of the state. Mr. Johnson performed his survey, and when the survey was done, he ended up adding 21,000 square miles of territory to the state of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, or Kashmir in general. And so that on the one hand pleased the Maharaja, but at that time this territory was generally understood to be part of the Eastern Turkestan, which was on the Chinese side. The Chinese imperial dynasty controlled that. And it is this survey of 1890s that W.H. Johnson did, which forms the basis on which India today lays claim to this area called Aksai Chin. You can see Aksai Chin over here on the right. Aksai Chin. This is the territory on which is presently controlled by China and which is recognized as Chinese territory by Pakistan. So as you can tell, there are disputes remaining here. In 1947, the geographical and economic ties between Kashmir and what was to become Pakistan were much stronger than with India. For obvious reasons, the routes were better, the markets were on that side, where the Kashmir fruit and produce, etc. went. And these would become even more formidable if the Muslim majority district of Gurdaspur, which had 4 tehsils. Think of tehsils as parts of smaller parts of the district. If it was awarded to Pakistan, these links would become very formidable. Actually, the easiest route between Jammu, which is in the Indian Kashmir, and Srinagar, which is in the Vale of Kashmir. I think you saw the Vale of Kashmir shown here, the valley where Srinagar lies. The easiest route from Jammu over there was by way of Sialkot and Rawalpindi. Right? So the fate of Kashmir was inextricably linked to the fate of the Gurdaspur district. Now let's look at some of history of, once we have this historical background, contextual background we saw, and the geographical background, we'll go into the actual events of 1947. In 1820, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the great Sikh Empire, which had its capital in Lahore, confirmed a man named Gulab Singh as the Raja or ruler of Jammu. Jammu is in south. You can see Jammu over here. Jammu is in south. He was confirmed as a Raja of Jammu. And later on, Gulab Singh went on to expand his dominion to include Ladakh and Baltistan. He had not absorbed the Vale of Kashmir. At the same time, when Gulab Singh was awarded rule over Jammu, Ranjit Singh gave the fief or Jagir of Poonch. Poonch is, Poonch is here. You can see Poonch. Was a territory that was given to the brother of Gulab Singh. His name was Dhyan Singh. Right, so these two were brothers. It was not a state, but it was like a Jagir. Those who are familiar with Urdu or Hindi, but it was like a fief. But these two were distinct and separate entities. In 1846, the first Anglo-Sikh war occurred, and the Sikhs fought their first war against the British. When this war occurred, Gulab Singh of Jammu, instead of supporting his benefactors that he benefited from and siding with them, he remained neutral. And so, as a reward for that, the British gave him dominion over the Vale of Kashmir, the Valley of Kashmir, for a sum of 7.5 million rupees, which at that time was £500,000 sterling pounds. So that came under his dominion. Right? The Vale of Kashmir only had 10% of the population, but it was very important economically. Jammu was predominantly Hindu and Sikh, and the Vale of Kashmir was predominantly Muslim. The Vale was actually, according to 1941 census, more than 90% plus Muslim. Ladakh and Baltistan could not affect the demographic balance because they were they still are very sparsely populated. Maharaja Hari Singh, who was the ruler of Kashmir, he inherited the rule. He was the ruler in 1947. He inherited the rule in 1925, in which Muslim majority population endured tremendous hardship. Right? There was a system of begar that exists. Begar means actually working without pay. So public people among the public could be conscripted to do or serve in public works without really being paid. And this begar system was actually abolished in 1893. But that was in theory. It still continued all over Kashmir, particularly in the remote areas. The British objected to this practice, but many of British officers, when they traveled to Kashmir, they found it very convenient also, because you had these porters and coolies, working for free, among other things. In that rule, in that dominion, legislation was applied to favor the Hindu majority, right? And the Muslim majority was discriminated against. Until 1934, it was a capital offense to slaughter a cow. But after 1934, it still continued to be an offense, but it was not a capital offense. The higher ranks in armed forces, well, only Hindus were allowed to possess firearms license. Muslims were not allowed to possess, even though they were majority of population. The Hindu Dogras filled up the higher ranks in the armed services, like police or army, etc. The Kashmiri Pandits filled up the civic administration. And the Muslims were turned into a really docile population. In the 1920s, many Kashmiri Muslims started getting out of Kashmir and obtaining Western education in India. Some of the names that some of you might know, Sheikh Abdullah, G.M. Sadiq, Mirza Afzal Beg, etc. They went to study in India to obtain Western education. Right? Sheikh Abdullah was the first prime minister after independence of Kashmir state. He went to Aligarh Muslim University, the famous Muslim university in India. And when these people returned with their Western education, they formed a trend in opposition to the Maharaja's rule. This trend was known as the National Conference. It consisted of people who were Western educated. You can say secular in disposition, probably. But in 1931, Muhammad Yusuf Shah became the Mir Wais of the Vale or Valley of Kashmir. Mir Wais means Chief Khatib, sermon giver, you can say, right? And he represented the other trend which opposed the Maharaja's rule, known as the Islamic Conference. Unfortunately, it so happened that Sheikh Abdullah and Mir Wais Yusuf Shah always quarreled with each other. And this disunity between these two trends opposed to the Maharaja's rule continued till 1947, and those who are familiar would know continued well after 1947, and its manifestation can be seen even today. Right? In 1935 and 1936, through successful lawsuits in the British court, Maharaja Hari Singh, the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, he brought Poonch under his control. And the British courts ruled in favor. Remember, it was given to the brother of one of his ancestors, so technically it belonged to their cousin, his cousin. I do not know the details of what the disputes there were, but the courts ruled in his favor, and he was able to obtain Poonch under his dominion. The Muslim majority, overwhelming Muslim majority population of Poonch never really reconciled to being an integral part of Maharaja Hari Singh's Jammu and Kashmir state. At that time, some facts which seemed to argue in favor of, the Pakistani side used, in favor of the Pakistani claims were the following. Number one, they claim that there's overwhelming Muslim population and the state is contiguous to the Muslim majority state of Punjab. Number two, its economy was very closely linked to the areas that became Pakistan and not closely linked with the areas that became India. And number three, the three rivers of Pakistan, namely we say the Jhelum, Chenab, and the Indus River, were very vital to the prosperity and well-being of Pakistan. Actually, those who are familiar with the name Mangla Dam, the Great Mangla Dam, which is on the Pakistani side of Kashmir, it is in what used to be the Jammu and Kashmir state. So this gives the background, the contextual, historical, and the geographical background. And we'll now move to the events of 1947. And I'll be mentioning a lot of dates, so please pay attention to the dates. It's important, very important. And I will not mention the year. When I mention dates without mentioning year, I mean 1947. Those are the events we are examining here. Come August 15, 1947, Hari Singh failed to decide whether, Hari Singh the Maharaja failed to decide whether he wanted to accede to India or Pakistan. And under the rules of partition, it was technically entirely an independent state of Jammu and Kashmir. The state was obviously of economic importance, military importance, strategic importance to both sides, but it was also of psychological importance, and neither side, India or Pakistan, were interested in seeing its fate being in limbo and not being decided soon. But then there was no single authority that could decide one way or another or could lean one way or another, not even the last viceroy of British India. The last viceroy of British India became the first Governor General of India, but he was not the Governor General of Pakistan. He wanted to be, but Mr. Jinnah had denied him that authority. At the 11th hour, the last moment, Maharaja Hari Singh decided to seek a standstill agreement. We talked about the standstill agreement with both sides, with India and Pakistan. So on August 12th, 3 days before August 15th, right, Janak Singh, who was the Prime Minister of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, sent a telegram both to Delhi and Karachi seeking standstill agreement. The Pakistan side responded on August 15th, accepting, and they entered into a standstill agreement with Pakistan, with Kashmir. The Indian side procrastinated, arguing that somebody needs to go down to Delhi from Kashmir and discuss the issues before a standstill agreement could be entered into. But ultimately, eventually, there was no standstill agreement that occurred between Kashmir and India. The Muslim population, most notably in Poonch area, right, was agitating vigorously. Under the circumstances, the most urgent matter for the Prime Minister of Kashmir was how to keep Maharaja's control over Kashmir. Accession was not an urgent matter because it could always be put off through the instrument of standstill agreement, and they obtained that with Pakistan at least, right? The Poonch population actually sort of rebelled with quote-unquote a no tax campaign, will not pay taxes. And this quickly turned into a secessionist movement in Poonch as well as in nearby Srinagar. You know where Srinagar is, right? Here. So in Poonch as well as in Srinagar, people tried to celebrate Pakistan Day on August 14, which incidentally coincided with Kashmir Day, which was also celebrated on August 14 since 1931. I myself did not know this fact until I read Alastaire Lamb. Now, during the riots that ensued in partition area, about 500,000 Muslims were displaced from the Jammu area, right? About 200,000 of them simply disappeared, according to Lamb's study. But as these people made their way into areas that became passionate, and their narration of what happened ignited passions in Poonch and other areas also. And they reported that not only armed hooligans committed atrocities, but also the armed forces, the army and police of the Maharaja, also committed atrocities. So this ignited passions now. These events greatly affected the attitudes, particularly in Poonch, which was essentially the one area that could form a true, you can say, resistance to the rule of Maharaja, because this area of Poonch had more than 60,000 ex-servicemen. Many of them had served in the British Army in the Second World War, etc. So they knew how to use firearms, etc. Mindful of this reality, Maharaja issued a decree in July 1947 that all Muslims must hand over firearms to the authorities. But as Lamb reports that when Muslims saw the same arms appearing in the hands of Sikh and Hindu population, they began seeking help from across the frontier, from the Pakistan side or from the other side. Mr. Jinnah, Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, he had dispatched Mian Iftikharuddin, I think Mian Iftikharuddin Ahmad, if I'm not mistaken, who was a very wealthy man, as an emissary to Srinagar to go and assess the situation if it was possible to settle the Kashmir dispute peacefully. Mian Iftikharuddin, he returned sometime in the first half of September back to Pakistan, and he reported to Mr. Jinnah that a peaceful settlement of the Kashmir issue is not likely. And it seems that this time the Pakistanis started contemplating some unorthodox or unofficial ways of helping the Poonch rebellion, which was within Jammu and Kashmir state, right? And Mian Iftikharuddin may have been the person who helped them. He was a very wealthy man. Actually, he was the founder of Pakistan Times. I mean, some of you from Pakistan may be aware of a newspaper called Pakistan Times. He was the founder of that newspaper. He was a very wealthy man, and he may have financed providing weapons, etc., to the Poonch rebellion. Lamb says that the evidence suggests that Mr. Jinnah was kept in dark. He did not know about these operations to aid the Poonch rebellion. In September, the following month after independence, fuel and other supplies coming from across the Pakistan side started dwindling, and the supply started reducing, right? And the Kashmir side accused the Pakistani side of withholding the supplies to put economic pressure, which is a possibility. The Pakistan side tried to clarify that the truck drivers are reluctant to go on the Kashmir side because of the prevailing riots and the environment that was there in Kashmir at that time. Nonetheless, on October 18, Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, he sent a telegram to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Liaqat Ali Khan, who was, later on assassinated, if those who know the history of Pakistan. He sent a telegram asking them to lift the economic pressure. Otherwise, he said, we may have to seek outside help. And that was not exactly code language as far as the Pakistan side was concerned. It was outside help means seeking help from India. So Mr. Liaqat Ali Khan responded in a telegram saying that if the Prime Minister sought Indian help to complete the suppression of the Muslim majority in Kashmir, he will be responsible for the consequences. Then the Prime Minister of Kashmir fired back another telegram, and then there was another it became acrimonious and contentious, basically. So one possible approach to solving the Kashmir issue was seen by some as the Junagadh model. Junagadh was a state in India, British India, and I'll go to the next slide. This is the last slide. You see Junagadh in gray? Where? Yeah, here. This is Junagadh state, right, in gray. This was a mirror image of Kashmir. That means it had overwhelming majority of Hindu population, but the ruler was a Nawab, was a Muslim, right? It was much smaller, though, 3,000 square miles and only 700,000 population, right? And it had an unobstructed line of communication with the rest of Pakistan, meaning, you see the sea here, through the Arabian Sea, part of Indian Ocean, it could connect to the Pakistan side here, meaning no one from there had to go through Indian territory to go to the other side of Pakistan. Junagadh also had some pockets of territory which were entirely inside Indian territory. That means these pockets were completely surrounded by Indian territory. They belonged to the state of Junagadh, but they resided entirely within Indian territory. And one such territory was known as Mangrol. On August, the Nawab of Junagadh waited till last moment, and on August 15th, he announced he's acceding to Pakistan, right? Sure. So on August 15th, the Nawab of Junagadh announced he's acceding to Pakistan. The Prime Minister of Junagadh state was Sir Shah Nawaz Bhutto, who was the grandfather of the late Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. He was a supporter of Mr. Jinnah. And apparently Mr. Jinnah saw in Junagadh a useful tool to solve the Kashmir problem. Some of the ideas that were contemplated were that, okay, one side takes Kashmir, the other side takes Junagadh, or plebiscite or referendum in Junagadh in exchange for a referendum in Kashmir. Right? Actually, Prime Minister Nehru, Pandit Nehru of India, on September 30th, 30, proposed officially to Pakistan the idea of a plebiscite in Junagadh. Okay. Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, 2 weeks later, on October 16th, indicated to Lord Mountbatten that he accepted the idea of plebiscite in Junagadh, but the Pakistani side did not officially respond to the Indian side, even though he indicated to Mountbatten. And Lamb says that is presumably because the Pakistani side was hopeful and expectant that there will be a balancing proposition forthcoming from India about a plebiscite or a referendum in Kashmir. Right? On October 25, that fateful day in October, Indian forces intervened into Mangrol. Remember that territory of Junagadh? It was completely surrounded by Indian territory, a pocket of Junagadh territory. And officially, Junagadh, including Mangrol, after the accession on August 15th, was technically Pakistani territory under the rules of a partition. So, in a sense, Indian forces had invaded Pakistani territory. Subsequently, there was a plebiscite held in Junagadh, and as expected, the overwhelming majority of the people voted to join the Indian Union. In August and September, Hari Singh, the Maharaja, the ruler of Kashmir, was still undecided about accession. He favored independence and was not particularly happy about joining one side or another, even about joining India. But with rising opposition to his rule, particularly the Poonch rebellion, and elsewhere also, including Gilgit and some other pockets also, he figured he needed some help. And to get that help, he figured accession just might be the price to pay. And therefore, some changes on his side, on his government, seemed necessary in order to negotiate obtaining help from the Indian side. So he appointed Meherchand Mahajan as the Prime Minister of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Meherchand Mahajan was from Gurdaspur, and he was an attorney. He was also a member of the Punjab Border Commission, which was the boundary commission had two commissions, Punjab Commission and the Bengal Commission. Pakistan was east and west, right? So he was part of the boundary commission that awarded ultimately Gurdaspur to the Indian side. Mahachand, later on it emerged, and as Lamb says, was an appointee of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the first Home Minister or Interior Minister of India, for the position of the Prime Minister of Kashmir. In September, after this agreement to seek help from India, war material started being flown into Kashmir, and arrangements were made in Jammu to receive the supplies, war material from India. The Maharaja also got in touch with other Indian princely states which had joined India by that time, right? And of course, they measured a good degree of control because this was right after independence. So in the first half of October, the Sikh Maharaja of Patiala provided the Kashmir state with an infantry battalion and a battery of mountain artillery. Lamb suggests that this was a covert operation that was known both to Sardar Patel as well as Sardar Baldev Singh, who was the defense minister of India. And he said that Mr. Nehru was kept in dark about this covert operation. Sheikh Abdullah, we talked about Sheikh Abdullah, was one of the people who opposed the Maharaja's rule, who went to India to study, etc. He was a friend of Mr. Nehru, very close friend of Mr. Nehru, the Prime Minister of India. And Mr. Nehru saw in Sheikh Abdullah a fellow Kashmiri. Mr. Nehru was also from Kashmir. He saw a fellow Kashmiri who also envisioned, like him, an undivided secular India over the entire territory. This is how he viewed Abdullah. But Abdullah in the past had been jailed, at least because of his agitation against the rule of Maharaja. He was jailed in Kashmir, not in India at that time, in 1947. But in 1947, despite all this, the Maharaja still had some hope that he could win over Abdullah from inside, because if he won Abdullah, then he had a face that would represent the Muslim population. He wanted to win him over to the idea of an independent Kashmir. The Maharaja was mindful of the fact that you could collect dues on trade between China and Central Asia and India and Central Asia. And of course, it could be a destination, as he saw Switzerland of the East, a tourist destination. This is how the Maharaja has saw it, seen this, But Sheikh Abdullah at that time with the Maharaja and later on also was very, very ambiguous and enigmatic about exactly what he wanted. And his ambiguity is as much responsible as anything else for having the Kashmir issue so muddled, so to speak. So on October 16th, Sheikh Abdullah traveled to Delhi, and obviously as he traveled, he always stayed with his friend, typically stayed with his friend Mr. Nehru, and he stayed this time also with Mr. Nehru, and Lamb said that it is almost certain that the issue of accession must have been discussed. It is unthinkable that they wouldn't discuss the matter of accession at this time. So the Poonch rebel, we talked about the rebellion in Poonch area. The Poonch rebels had been in contact with the tribal leaders in the northwest frontier adjacent to the Kashmir on what is the Pakistani side since at least middle of September. And they were seeking supplies as well as personnel to help their rebellion. Right? Now here comes the incident, and pay attention to the details. There was a bridge over the river Jhelum on a place called Domel, right? And this bridge had a state of Jammu and Kashmir garrison stationed there. This was the state of Jammu and Kashmir garrison, Maharaja's garrison. The commander of the garrison was a Dogra Rajput, not a Muslim. He had instructions to blow up the bridge if there were any invaders or invading forces came from Pakistan side to cross to the bridge, right? The garrison itself was half Dogra Rajput and half Muslim. So on the very early morning of October 22, that would be the night between October 21 and 22. So in the very early morning hours of October 22, the Poonch Muslims who were part of this garrison, they attacked the other soldiers and the commander. They finished the commander as well as they finished most of the garrison, most of the Dogra Rajputs in the garrison. And Alastaire Lamb theorizes that if they had at least half a dozen decent armored vehicles, then they could have made it to the Srinagar airfield that same evening on October 27, and the Kashmir issue would have been altered completely. But that is his theorization. That did not occur, of course, because Srinagar airfield was roughly 100 miles from there. The Domel incident was an internal rebellion inside Jammu and Kashmir state. Remember, that garrison, half of it attacked the other half. The entire force was Jammu and Kashmir force, Maharaja's force. So over that bridge came the Pathan enforcement for Poonch. Pathans are the people who came from across the frontier, from the Pakistan side. Right? Lamb estimates that they numbered no more than 3,000, and he gives different models and why his estimate is 3,000 based on a number of things. He advances his evidence. However, the Indian side has contended that there were as many as 70,000 who came from across the bridge from the other side. But their arrival, Lamb says, was a most unfortunate consequence for the Poonch rebels because of because of the love for plunder and indiscriminate fighting on part of the Pathan tribesmen. It created crucial delays for the Poonch rebel or the rebellion, and also it created a huge PR image for them. On October 24, October 21 and 22 we saw the Domel incident. On October 24, an emissary was dispatched to Srinagar from New Delhi, or from Delhi at that time, from India, with an offer of accession to India. And on the same day, on October 27, on the same day, the Poonch rebels declared an independent state of Azad Kashmir in Poonch. Not exclusively limited to Azad Kashmir. That didn't mean they gave up claim to the rest of Kashmir, but they declared a state of Azad Kashmir on October 24th. Right? And then they advanced fairly close to Srinagar and took over the Mahura power station, which was only 30 miles from the city of Srinagar. On October 26, seeing this rebellion build up or close in towards Srinagar, the Maharaja fled Srinagar and went to the relative safety of Jammu to the south. Prime Minister Mahajan went to Delhi under these circumstances to seek some assistance, particularly military assistance, right? But he asked for help without promising accession. He didn't have Maharaja's permission to promise accession in return. And Mr. Nehru was very reluctant to offer assistance unless there were some, what he said were constitutional reforms within Kashmir. And he put a condition that Sheikh Abdullah be made the Prime Minister of Kashmir. Now, Mahajan was reluctant, but ultimately he agreed. And Mahajan later wrote in his memoirs, and please pay attention here, that he and V.P. Menon was the Deputy Prime Minister of India. He was very instrumental in the accession of various states to India. There are some interesting incidents. If you ask in Q&A, we can cover. He was the highest ranking Indian in the British Raj as civil servant. He was the highest ranking civil servant. He was the only Indian who was an advisor to the Viceroy. Several Viceroy, not just Mountbatten. Before that to Lord Wavell, and before that to Lord Linlithgow. Okay. So he and Mahajan, they travel, and Mahajan writes in his memoirs that on October 27th, the two traveled to Jammu, where Maharaja had gone to from Srinagar, to obtain the Maharaja's signature on some supplemental documents related to accession. This is how he described it. Interestingly, V.P. Menon wrote in his memoirs that they flew together on the afternoon of October 26th itself, the same day when Maharaja apparently came from Srinagar to Jammu, that they flew on the afternoon, and they went and took the Maharaja's signature on the actual instrument of, meaning document of accession. So there is a variance between the two narratives as registered by Mahajan and Mr. V.P. Menon in their memoirs. Right? On early morning of 27 October, airlift of Indian troops began, and within just a few days, there were 35,000 Indian troops who were involved in the defense of the Vale of Kashmir on behalf of the Maharaja. So over 100 Dakota aircraft were assembled in airfields around Delhi. I don't know if you know, have you heard of Dakota aircraft? Maybe we'll talk in Q&A if you have a question about the Dakota aircraft. They were military transport at that time. So they were assembled in airfields around Delhi, and Lamb contends that it is not possible to have made such arrangements in less than 24 hours for such a massive airlift. And this was actually subsequently confirmed when the memoirs of Sardar Patel, the Home Minister, Interior Minister of India, were published some 20 years later. In his memoirs, he said that these preparations were going on for more than a month before that. In October 27, the day, either 26 or 27, or on the 27, purportedly the day when Mountbatten either signed supplemental documents or the actual instrument of accession. In acceptance of that instrument or that document, Mountbatten put in a letter accompanying his acceptance, the following words. It says, where the issue of accession has been subject of dispute, the question of accession should be decided in accordance with the wishes of people of the state. It is my wish that as soon as law and order has been restored in Kashmir and her soil cleared of the invader, the question of the state's accession should be settled by a reference to the people. Alastaire Lamb says this made nonsense of the claim of accession, because this reference to people meant that the accession instrument or acceptance was conditional upon reference to the people or acceptance by the people. Not surprisingly, therefore, Pakistan lost no time and contested the validity of this claim of accession by India on 4 grounds. First, Pakistan stated that the accession was legally invalid it was a violation of the standstill agreement that existed between the state of Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan. Number two, the Maharaja on October 26 and 27 was not competent to sign any instrument of accession, because to all intents and purposes, he had been overthrown. He did not have control over the state. There was a rebellion in Poonch. An independent state of Azad Kashmir was already declared. The Gilgit Scouts had declared their independence from the Kashmir state. And there were other pockets of trouble also. So he was not competent to decide or sign the instrument of accession, because now you're talking about in that territory you have more than one ruler, roughly speaking. And that he himself had fled the Vale, the capital of Srinagar, for the safety of Jammu. And that only perhaps in Ladakh and Jammu the Maharaja could claim that he had control, that he could maintain without external help, meaning without Indian help. Yeah. Can we complete the third and fourth point in 1 minute and then we can continue? Okay. Yeah. So those were the 2 points. The third point raised by the Pakistan side was the instrument of accession was conditional, meaning it had to be settled by reference to the people, right? And if the reference to the people determines that the people are not in favor of it, then whatever that accession was gets invalidated. So this was their third argument. So the best one could state about the document signed was that the instrument or the documents committed the Maharaja to consult his people about the future of the state. But very soon the Maharaja was not in a position to do that, to consult his people, because as a condition of Indian help he had accepted the prime ministership of Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah, when he became prime minister, one of the first things he did was he fired the Maharaja. The Maharaja was no longer the ruler of Kashmir. You figure how that happened, but he did fire, and Maharaja was no longer the ruler of Kashmir after that. Fourth, and this one is a serious charge by the Pakistani side, that India's dealings concerning Kashmir from the beginning of Mountbatten's viceroyalty were dominated by fraud, which culminated in annexation of the state by force. And we'll continue by expanding on this point after we come back after Salat al-Isha, inshallah. Take a break here. So we were talking about the fourth point that the Pakistani side charged, that during the final days of the Raj, or the British rule, the government in Delhi was hostile to the idea of a Muslim state, as they charged, and did their best to ensure a stillbirth for it, meaning to make sure that it's a dead on arrival scenario for the dominion of Pakistan, as they charged. And Lamb says that this received some substantiation from the diary of Sir Cloud Auchinleck. Sir Cloud Auchinleck, at the time of India's independence, was the supreme commander of armed forces in British India. And after August 15, after the partition, immediately after the partition, he was the supreme commander of armed forces in India, as well as those of Pakistan, the nominal supreme commander. And he wrote in his diary, as Lamb reproduces it, "I have no hesitation whatever in affirming that the present India cabinet are implacably determined to do all in their power to prevent the establishment of the dominion of Pakistan on a firm basis. In this, I am supported by the unanimous opinion of my senior officers, and indeed by all British officers cognizant of this situation." So the Pakistani suspicions were rooted in great part, in the award of the Muslim majority district of Gurdaspur to India. The Boundary Commission had finished their work on August 9th, I believe. They did not announce the results of the Boundary Commission until August 17th. But by August 9th, it was a done deal. But then there was evidence that between August 9th and 12th, the award was changed. So only 1 out of 4 tehsils of Gurdaspur district was awarded to Pakistan, and the award of the other tehsil was changed to India. And the Pakistani side felt that Mountbatten himself was involved in this sleight of hand. So this was the basis, root of their suspicion. Whereas the accession of Kashmir itself, was it manipulated or engineered? This is a question that Alastaire Lamb tries to address. He says the following evidence or following information has come since then. It was not immediately apparent right at the time of partition. First, he said that Mr. Nehru and Congress leaders had, from the outset of Mountbatten's viceroyalty of his rule, made no secret of their views that Kashmir should accede to India. On June 17th of 1947, Mr. Nehru wrote a note, I believe, to Mountbatten that Kashmir should accede to India. And Patel's correspondence, Sardar Patel's correspondence, which was published later on, years later, left this in no doubt. Second, from at least the beginning of September, the Indian leadership was in contact with the government of Kashmir, and through advice and support for the appointment of Meher Chand Mahajan as the Prime Minister and offer of military support in return for accession, supposedly, this created an environment of manipulation. And this was confirmed some 20 years later when Patel's memoirs were published, where his correspondence was published, that the preparations were going on for a month before the accession date. And most importantly, the actual process of accession between 24 and 27th October was manipulated by Mr. Nehru, Mr. Patel, and Mr. Sheikh Abdullah, according to Alastaire Lamb's work. Yeah, the proposal by Mr. Nehru that Sheikh Abdullah should be made Prime Minister of Kashmir was a condition for accession and for offering military support. Accession was supposed to be a free choice. Finally, Mahajan's narrative contains a fascinating suggestion that Indian troops started arriving before the accession took place. Remember, in his memoirs, he wrote that the instrument of accession or documents of accession were signed on October 27th. And on October 27th, the Indian troops started arriving in Srinagar, in Kashmir. So that raises an intriguing possibility that the troops started arriving before the accession took place. But more intriguing is the part, Lamb says, is that when the Indian troops arrived in Srinagar on October 27th, they found other Indian troops already present on the Srinagar airfield. And these were the Patiala forces. Remember, we talked about the Sikh Maharaj of Patiala in early October providing a battalion of infantry and a battery of mountain artillery, right? They arrived there around 17th of October. That was 5 days before the incident at Domel over that bridge on Jhelum River. Lamb expresses surprise that these 2 points, number one, the precise timing of accession, and number two, the arrival of the Patiala forces has never been raised by the Pakistan side in the great debate over Kashmir. The Patiala forces were, after all, Indian forces. Patiala had acceded to India, and the forces were technically under the command of the Supreme Military Commander of Indian Armed Forces. After that finally, we are coming to the close now. Lamb dissects two key questions here. Number one, what was the status of Azad Kashmir and who were the aggressors in those crucial days between October 21 and 27? And here's what he said, is that on 15th August, Jammu and Kashmir state was an independent state, and there's no other interpretation of the lapse of paramountcy is possible. The only interpretation is that Jammu and Kashmir became an independent state. And on October 24th, the independent state of Azad Kashmir was declared in Poonch. So Lamb raises the question, what does the accession by Maharaja mean? Did the Maharaja, even in theory, or at least in theory, bring Azad Kashmir with him when he signed the instrument of accession? Because by that time, Azad Kashmir was declared as an independent entity, right? The various movements in opposition to Maharaja's authority, rebellions taking place in Poonch and Gilgit Agency. And a Gilgit Agency had Gilgit Scouts, all of them were Muslims. So they, metaphorically speaking, they simply walked over to Pakistan, and Maharaja lost control over Gilgit Agency there. There were rebellions within an independent state of Jammu and Kashmir. All of these were rebellions inside the independent state of Jammu and Kashmir. Neither the Maharaja nor the rebels could claim authority over the entire state, right? And on the one hand, the Poonch rebels sought the help of Pathan fighters from across the frontier. On the other side, the Maharaja, the other contending power inside the state of Jammu and Kashmir, sought the help of India. Of course, Lamb takes issue with the use of the term aggression in the discourse by the Indian side to describe the arrival of the tribal forces in the early hours of October 22 at Domel, right? India has maintained that no solution is possible to Kashmir issue until this aggression is vacated, right? And the Indian side maintains that the Indian forces were there at the invitation of Maharaja, so their presence was legitimate, while the entry of the Pathan tribesmen were illegitimate. The crossing of the Jhelum at Domel by parties of Pathan tribesmen was at the invitation of internal elements in the political struggle in the control of state of Jammu and Kashmir, right? Independent state. And this was in support, their arrival was in support of the rebels who within 2 days were going to declare an independent state of Jammu and Kashmir, independent state of Azad Kashmir, I'm sorry. And so, therefore, this cannot be classified as an act of aggression by Pakistan, according to Alastaire Lamb. Technically, there was no difference between the arrival of the tribesmen and the arrival of Indian troops. The tribesmen came at the invitation of one party that wanted to control Kashmir, and the Indian forces, namely the Poonch rebels, and the Indian forces arrived at the invitation of Maharaja, the other party. With this in view, Lamb says it should be recognized that the Indian forces came in before the arrival of Pathan forces, the Pathan tribesmen. After all, the Patiala forces were under the command of the chief commander of the Indian Armed Forces. Now, a couple of comments and we finish. It's well known that Mountbatten has a special dislike for Mr. Jinnah. And Mountbatten saw the arrival of Pathan forces as a dirty trick of Jinnah. And he was determined to do whatever possible in his power to make sure that Jinnah's dirty game does not succeed. This is how he saw it. And he got so personally involved, as Alastaire Lamb writes, that on behalf of the Indian side, that he went to the Palam airport, the main airport in Delhi at that time, to personally oversee the airlift of troops and supplies to Srinagar, and he started behaving more like an Indian military commander rather than as the Governor General of India. And one of the And he, Mountbatten, when he signed the instrument of accession, as Lamb points out, he showed neither the courtesy nor nor did he actually execute the obvious step of informing the Pakistan government of his acceptance of the instrument of accession, particularly given that Kashmir had signed a standstill agreement with the Pakistan side. So it is well known the dynamics of dislike on the part of Mountbatten for Mr. Jinnah played into this issue also. 4 days after accession, on November 1, Mr. Nehru, Prime Minister of India, stated in a telegram to Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan. Elsewhere, I have read that this telegram was sent on 27th October itself, but I believe November is a more correct date. But this telegram from Prime Minister's office numbered 202, I believe. But nonetheless, the text is the same. This is the telegram that was sent. And I read, I should like to make it clear that the question of aiding Kashmir in this emergency is not designed in any way to influence the state to accede to India. Our view, which we have repeatedly made public, is that the question of accession in any disputed territory or state must be decided in accordance with the wishes of people, and we adhere to this view. Our assurance that we shall withdraw our troops from Kashmir as soon as peace and order are restored and leave the decision regarding the future of the state to the people is not merely a pledge to your government, meaning to Pakistan government, but also to the people of Kashmir and to the world. And next day on November 2, 1947, Mr. Nehru, in a broadcast on All India Radio, repeated the same pledge. And on that note, we end this inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.